Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with my Ignite Glyph Dominion build guide. I finally managed to find the items that I needed to get a solid tier 4 Julra kill, and you'll see in this little clip, the timing is really solid. The build itself is fun, it's super flashy. You can see Glyph of Dominion has a really cool animation and it covers almost the whole screen once you get it skilled up enough. Frost Claw is fun, Frost Wall is fun as well. And overall the build has great single target, great AoE, and honestly the only area where it lacks a little bit from my perspective is on the defense side. So see if you can take it up a notch and improve it even further. But yeah, I'm going to walk you through the item choices, the skill choices that I've made, why I've made some of them, and where I see some room for improvement. So let's go ahead and check it out. Irashaimase! Alright, so let's start with talking about the skills that we're utilizing here. And this build's primary source of damage is Glyph of Dominion. So let's start there. Basically, we want to go into these three nodes right up here, convert it to fire damage, and then make sure you get this one maxed out. Ignite stacks every 0.5 seconds plus 3. That means we're getting 6 stacks of Ignite per second. And what this means here, Fan of the Inferno, Ignite frequency per Ignite chance increased by 1%. This means that if you get 100% Ignite chance, that's going to double your Ignite stacks per second from this node. Ignite stacks, or sorry, your Ignite chance does not get added into this Ignite stacks every 0.5 seconds. So the only source of Ignite for Glyph of Dominion is this +3 per 0.5 seconds. Nothing else triggers Ignite. It's just a matter of increasing the frequency with your Ignite chance. That's something that I actually misread when I first looked at this skill. But after thorough testing, maybe like an hour to 2 hours of testing, we confirmed, like for example, this shock to Ignite chance conversion here has absolutely no impact on your ignites through these two nodes, so don't bother getting shock chance. That's one mistake that I made. And so yeah, if you can get your ignite up to something like 1,000 to 1,200%, that's probably around the maximum you'll be able to get. That means you're going to be proccing something like 60 to 70 ignite stacks per second just from Glyph of Dominion. So yeah, make sure to go for these three nodes first. You want to have as large of an area as possible, so I maxed this out. This is a damage multiplier, basically double damage for your ignites. Doom Scribe is kind of nice because it makes your Glyph of Dominion last longer on the ground. And the other must-have node is Power Word Devastation. Because of our setup, we're always going to have 3 Ra runes. And that means 90% more damage, so pretty much double damage, and 90% extra area. So always make sure you have 3 Ra runes before activating your Glyph of Dominion. Some other notables here include Atomization. If you have extra skill points, this is not bad. As long as you can apply Armor Shred on the enemy. It's a 1.14 damage multiplier. If you really want to go more of a defensive route with this skill, you can try maxing out these two nodes. And so that means you're going to get ward per second for every 4% uncapped resistances. And if you can stack that up, especially with this plus 75% all res from Arcane Mirror, it can actually provide quite a bit of ward per second. So it's definitely something to consider. The issue though is it is cast on you, which makes it quite a bit more limiting. You cannot just pop it on the edge of the screen and funnel enemies through that. And so that careful playstyle that might be useful at high corruption is not going to be available to you. You will have to position your hero in a way where you get the glyph in the location that you want it. All of the other nodes are pretty much useless, so don't worry about them. The next skill I want to talk about is Frost Claw. So this is another damage source that is very respectable. Against bosses, it probably is about half of your damage. So it's no joke. But not only that, it also generates a ton of ward because of Shiver Shell. but also because of this passive node right here, 36 ward per rune on area skill use. And so because we always have max runes, we don't really use our runes other than for the glyph. And this somehow is still considered an area skill despite us taking Volley of Glass. And so it works quite well in that you get tons and tons of ward by just spamming Frostclaw. Other than that, try to get the mana cost of the skill as low as possible with Frozen Rain and Gift of Winter, because we do end up going into Volley of Glass and Hand of Morditas to get extra projectiles and to be enabled to hit the same target with all of the projectiles. And obviously we want to convert everything to fire so we get all of the ignite chance that we can. And that 1000% ignite chance that we have applies to every single hit from Frostclaw, and we're hitting 5 times every single target. So, you know, you're getting quite a few stacks of ignite per cast, somewhere between 50 to 100 easily. A little bit of cast speed and ailment cleansing here doesn't hurt in Bright Frost. This chill chance gets converted to ignite chance, so I'm just picking up a few decent skills along the way. Increased ailment duration is nice because it applies to our ignites. So against bosses, it can be essentially 10 to 20% increased damage depending on how many ignite duration idols you have. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Next, let's look into Frost Wall. Frost Wall is quite important both for defense and offense purposes as well. So here you have Biting Limit, which gives you 200% frostbite chance. And when we convert Frost Wall to fire, that frostbite chance actually becomes fire res shred chance. And there really aren't too many fire res shred chance options available, outside of blessings especially. So this is a tremendous way to increase your DPS and just pop it on top of the bosses that have the highest survivability, and this will go a long way for you. Brand of Invaders is okay. The DPS is not amazing, but against trash, it actually kills them. Frostwall actually is really good at cleaning up trash, so don't underestimate it for that purpose. Otherwise, for defensive purposes, you can do Prepared Wards, and I strongly recommend it. This is one of the best skills in the game. I'm pretty much certain it's going to get nerfed. It's just way too good. It's kind of a permanent Flame Ward, which is incredibly OP. On top of that, by having Prepared Wards, we can actually spec into Flame Ward and avoid putting Flame Ward in our skill bar, which opens up a slot for Runic Invocation. And Runic Invocation doesn't actually need to be on our specialized skills because we don't benefit from any of the skill nodes in there. All we need it for is so that we can trigger the 3 raw runes, and that's it. So this is a really well synergized setup. Other than that, we get cleansing from Frostwall and Aspirant's Arrival. This is really solid for the damage per second of existence. Remember, Frostwall lasts 6 seconds, so if you can get at least 5 seconds, that's 2.5 times the damage for your next Glyph of Dominion cast within 5 seconds after you pass through your wall. So you probably saw me utilize that in the Julra video. You can pop a wall, count to 5, walk through, and then go and direct cast your Glyph of Dominion. Remember, it has to be a direct cast. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get this benefit. If you trigger it through Flame Rush, for example, you're not getting this benefit. I also like to max Crystals of Protection for mana recovery purposes. The ward is okay as well, but mainly for mana. Max Boosted Kickoff for extra haste and frenzy. And that's the Frostwall setup that I have right now. For Flame Rush, the most important elements on Flame Rush is to trigger your Glyph up here. And remember, it's still going to cost mana, so be aware of that. We get some mana efficiency and cooldown. We get damage reduction. That's not too bad, especially because we're forced to stay inside this Flame Rush for a second and a half. That can be quite debilitating if you don't have enough damage reduction. But also, we get a little bit of that buff, damage reduction, for an extra 45% of the duration after you actually finish your Flame Rush. We also get ward per second and ward burst after Flame Rush. So some solid defensive options down here. But mostly Flame Rush is just to proc Glyph of Intention, to give us some mobility, to give us some damage dodging if we can see some big telegraphed attack, and we can activate and get the damage reduction and essentially try and mitigate as much of the damage as possible. And then I have a bunch of points left over that I ended up putting in Ember Wake and all these other nodes here. But you can kind of do whatever you want with them. You don't really need to have Ember Wake and all these little Ember things. You have some other alternatives if you really want to. I used to put them in Fire Rest Shred until I spec'd our Frost Wall into Fire Rest Shred. So at that point, we no longer need the Fire Rest Shred. And finally, Flame Ward, the last skill we've specialized. And remember, we don't actually trigger it through our skill bar. We just trigger it through Frost Wall. We get 250% fire damage, which is quite significant. You want to make sure you pass through your Frost Wall before activating your Glyph of Dominion so that you can have this 250% damage bonus active. On top of that, you must max the duration and mana efficiency. Anything with mana efficiency really we want, because Frost Wall multiplies the mana consumption by 3.5x. So you'll quickly run out of mana if you don't take these two mana efficiency nodes. Normally I don't take this when I'm just running Flame Ward as is, but for this build I do recommend taking the mana efficiency option. And then less hit damage, less elemental damage, incredibly powerful nodes here. I would max these two out. And finally, let me just take a moment to note Runic Invocation, as is right now. You don't ever want to be clicking it, other than if you use Glyph of Dominion. Notice that because of this node right here, we have a 20-second cooldown on Glyph of Dominion. So if you actively click it, the only way to refresh the cooldown is if we activate Runic Invocation. So if you, let's say you have 3 runes like that, 3 Ra runes, then you happen to activate your Glyph of Dominion manually, direct cast, then you can cast Runic Invocation to reset the cooldown, as you can see. So I would recommend always comboing these up one after the other, just because that's when Runic Invocation is the cheapest for mana. But also, if you happen to have 3 Ra runes, casting Runic Invocation, not only is it 56 mana, but also it really doesn't do too much. So I would recommend, whenever you cast actively Glyph of Dominion, just follow it up with Runic Invocation so that you do have the option to again cast it if you need. But you also have the option to just rely on Flame Rush and always have that triggered by Flame Rush, so you don't have to actively cast it. And so those are all my notes for skills. Now let's talk about the itemization. Starting with the core items, items without which the build cannot function. So I don't think this build has any core items, to be honest. Every single item can be switched up for some exalted item, and the build perhaps won't perform as well, but it will still do all right. It will still function. So we have 4 actually semi-core items, and these are items that they're not must-have, but they are significantly beneficial for the build. So I strongly recommend them. And those are the 4 legendary items that you can see here. So let's start with Soulfire. The reason why I'm saying that this item is a semi-core item is because it can give you 190% ignite on hit with fire skills. And by the way, some of you might wonder, does ignite on hit with fire skills when it has that conditional identifier with fire skills? Does that apply to our Glyph of Dominion Fanda Inferno? Increased ignite frequency per ignite chance. And yes, it does apply. I've tested it, so trust me. I can show you the 1 or 2 hours of testing that we did, but it is guaranteed. Chance to ignite on hit with fire skills helps that node. And that really is the primary reason why we want to go Soulfire. 190% ignite is significant. Not only that, Soulfire has an incredibly low effective level for legendary potential. So you can definitely get 3 LP fairly easily, I want to say. You can see I only have 2 LP, but 3 LP is doable if you target farm it. And even 4 LP is doable. That, however, is going to be exceedingly rare. So I wouldn't kind of expect to have that in my build. That's something that you get if you're lucky. So anyways, next up is Calamity. And Calamity is best in slot and a semi-core item for similar reasons. You can get 150% ignite on hit with fire skills. And that is a really high number that boosts the DPS of the build significantly. You can also get it with 3 or 4 LP fairly easily, once again. So similar to Soulfire. And if you do get that 3 or 4 LP, it's ideally something that you can slot is chance to ignite on hit with fire skills, which is a mage specific prefix. So if you can get that at tier 7, go ahead, slot that in there. That's best in slot. I would honestly focus on defensive prefixes and suffixes because of the issues that this build runs into from a defense standpoint. For Soulfire, prefixes and suffixes, I would focus on increased elemental damage over time. Strength can be nice to boost our armor. Vitality 4 HP. Just flat HP, solid. And yeah, a lot of defensive options. Cast speed is good as well. Now let's talk about the third semi-core item, and that is our Scepter Firestarter's Torch. And this item is, again, it shares a lot of similarities with the other two we've covered so far in that it can spawn fairly easily with 3 or 4 LP because the effective level for legendary potential is low. And so if you do get that 3 or 4 LP Firestarter's Torch, definitely consider it for an Ignite build. I mean, it's kind of made for that purpose. Get that tier 7 Ignite into it. I would recommend get a tier 5 cast speed and a tier 5 damage over time. And the last suffix, really, you can do whatever you want with. I have shock on hit because I thought shock would help this build, but after that I realized it actually doesn't. So that's pretty much it for fire starters. It just adds a lot of damage from the 42% more fire damage to enemies afflicted by spreading flames. And the -4 fire spell mana cost actually helps this build quite a bit. So just an amazing item for an Ignite build in general. And the fourth semi-core item that I have for you is the Fire Dragon Shoes. Why are they semi-core? Fire penetration with Ignite, 35%. There aren't too many sources of fire pen, so this increases your DPS quite a bit. It also gives you some fire damage, fire trail when you are crit. That's something that is surprisingly useful when you're running monoliths. If you get it to proc, you can just run forward and enemies are going to die behind you because you have so much Ignite. That fire trail is deadly. And finally, the reduced bonus damage taken from critical strikes. That synergizes super well with Mental Catalyst. You can see just 2 points in Mental Catalyst together with these boots is basically crit immunity. That's all you need. So these boots are great for defensive and offensive purposes. So all around, just great boots. Get tier 7 movement speed if you can. These, you can get them with 2 LP as well. They're not just 1 LP spawnable. Try to get these 4 semi-core items with at least some LP in them when you're speccing into this build. Next, I want to highlight the belt. Isadora's Tomb Binding. The armor from this belt is so significant, and that's why I love it. It also gives you 15% cast speed, which never spawns on belts, so it's quite unique to this set belt. And you can see my armor goes from 1400 to 2400. It's like a 60% increase in armor. Absolutely ridiculous. A great belt overall. The damage reduction that it gives us is definitely worth it, as well as the cast speed. So it's a good defensive and offensive belt. If you don't happen to have a good one, or if you don't happen to have it at all, a elemental damage over time prefix with some defensive suffixes is probably your best bet for belts. For the rest of your items, the one that is maybe noteworthy is your chest piece, where you must have Ignite on hit with fire skills, preferably tier 7. It provides a lot to the build, so and it's another source of Ignite on hit. So try to get it if you can. Again, Ignite on hit on Amulet, elemental damage over time on Amulet. The other two don't matter as much. Honestly, I would love to have health instead of shock on hit here. And then I went for the cast speed implicit amulet as well. In terms of offhand, you want fire damage, cast speed, and then suffixes that help you max out your res and get more tanky. Ruby ring is really strong for your ring selection. It gives you fire damage, and if you can get the elemental damage over time, and then the other three affixes, honestly, just focus on defenses would be my recommendation. Same with your other ring, elemental dot, and then whatever you want just to get your defenses maxed out. For gloves, you can see I have tier 7 dot, tier 5 cast speed, and then defensive suffixes. You can consider getting like a tier 6 or tier 7 defensive affix here. Tier 7 damage over time does not give you nearly as much as tier 7 elemental damage over time. The affix range is just much lower cap than elemental dot. So you don't get nearly as much from it. So because of that, I would not feel too bad about having just tier 5 dot and having, let's say, tier 6 hybrid health or tier 7 hybrid health. I would definitely prefer that over this particular set of prefixes on my gloves, despite it being tier 7. You can also consider atrophy. I would not recommend it. I think atrophy, for the offensive capabilities that it provides in a little bit of fire pen for your ignites, I don't think it's worth the sacrifice in defensive suffixes. The fire penetration, keep in mind that it is additive to the fire penetration with ignite from your boots and from any other source, like your passives right here. So this 15 fire pen it's all additive. So you're not getting as much from atrophy as you might think. Not only that, atrophy, it's quite hard to get it to spawn with 2 LP. And really, I would say you need at least 2 LP to make it usable. So all in all, I don't think atrophy is a good choice here. Not to mention that it has less armor and it doesn't have void res. And this build struggles a little bit on the defensive side. So atrophy, not a great choice. However, in terms of relics, a solid defensive choice would be Twisted Heart of Eukaros. So think about Soulfire as the best in slot offensive relic, and Twisted Heart of Eukaros as the best in slot defensive relic. If you're really struggling with your defenses and you're dying too much, definitely consider switching to a Twisted Heart, especially if you have cast speed. The more cast speed you have, the more ward you're going to generate. And you're even going to get some elemental spell levels. 20% health doesn't hurt either. Anyway, Twisted Heart is one of my favorite relics. Definitely have to consider it, especially if you have a really well rolled one, like a 2 LP with tier 7 cast speed. Oh yeah, I will be very tempted to forego all of this ignite for a Twisted Heart. And that would solve my problems with survivability, honestly. And against bosses, I like to have Invoker Rings on Switch. They're highly offensive. You can see they provide 3 super strong offensive bonuses in Ignite on Hit, damage over time, and Fire Spell cast speed. All of those are improved damage. However, they don't provide anything on the defensive side. So all around, they're not as good as just Exalted Rings. But against bosses that you can maybe burst and avoid getting hit by, like for example, Julra, this is a really good on-switch item. Something else you can consider for on-switch is a belt with super high tier 7 elemental dot. I do believe that should give you more DPS than Isadora's. Keep in mind you're going to lose all the armor, but I think that should be okay against Julra. If you find yourself dying a lot, you can consider Aurora's Time Glass. It gives you some endurance, cast speed, ward retention, which is great for the build, as well as something like a cheat death if you go under 30% health, and if you don't get one shot, that is, it will give you a bunch of ward. So those are just some of the alternative items that I wanted to mention, and you can keep those into consideration when you're building out your character. But that's pretty much it for itemization. Now, in terms of idols, the most important idols I want to mention are these ornate idols, and they give you 25% ignite duration. You don't have other sources of ignite duration, so that's pretty much 25% more damage, especially against bosses. The ignite duration might not come into effect against trash mobs, but definitely against bosses, this is just straight up 25% more damage. So yeah, go ahead and pop these ornate idols in your idol inventory if you can. 2 of them. And in terms of suffixes, you have multiple good options. 12% armor and mana is solid. And 40% fire damage times 2 over 300 mana is another really solid option. Other than that, you can pretty much do whatever you want to max out your defenses and improve some of your ward per second while standing on a Glyph of Dominion, as you can see here. Suffixes, I probably want armor and mana here, percentage, but unfortunately I have some spell call damage. And the rest, you can see, they're just defensive idols, as well as idols to make sure I hit 300 mana. For blessings, on the Black Sun, Ignite on hit, I do believe is best in slot. Ending the Storm, there aren't too many good choices, so just go with ward per second. If you really need, perhaps max mana can be decent, but if you're struggling with defenses as I was, get some ward per second. Here, because of the fact that we don't actually need crit strike avoidance, the pretty much only choice left is all res. So go ahead with all res on Reign of Dragons. Age of Winter and Spirits of Fire, I just opt for more armor. And so that's it for blessings. On the passive side, you can see I have 25 points on Mage, and really here the most important nodes are the attack and cast speed here. Ward retention is actually surprisingly good because we're actually opting to avoid stacking intelligence with this build. I don't think intelligence adds very much. You can see we have 25, but we can definitely take that down even further because Ignite doesn't benefit from int. The main reason we want intelligence is for ward retention here. It doesn't actually give us any damage. So because of the low int, we want to get more ward retention when wherever we can. And this is a good option, more than 50%. Make sure to max out Ice and Fire for the 35 Ignite on hit and 35 fire damage. I think that's a solid investment. And then Sork Tree here, you have some really good cast speed in Arcane Momentum. Extra armor and mana, that's really good for Mana Shell here. And then the usual Pyromancer and Lavamancer that we always get these two depending on the skill. This actually we don't max out sometimes, but because it gives fire skill ignite chance, it's not that bad. I would still pick this out and max this out. On the Runemaster skill tree, there are just quite a few good ones in here, so it's hard to choose sometimes. We definitely want some points in unsealed mana for the cast speed primarily. We also want to make sure to get all of the ignite chance that we can from Circle of Elements. Ward on direct spellcast is really good here. I highlighted that int is not the highest priority for the build, but the ward per direct spellcast is super strong here. Defense is a problem for the build, so make sure to get that. This is to max out our crit avoid essentially. And this node is a must-have. Edict of the Scion increases our area for our glyph, but also gives us tons and tons of ward whenever we cast Frostclaw. This node gives us 72% ward retention with the scepter. If you're using a wand, you can drop it because we don't really need crit multi. Then we get a little bit of cast and move speed, some ward per second, some damage additional against bosses. And here we get Elemental Pen with damage over time. So this is a good addition. Extra Elemental Pen is always nice. And here we just kind of ran out of points. So we couldn't put too many, but 3 points into extra damage to branded enemies. And pretty much every single enemy is going to be branded as long as they're near your frost wall. That is our source of branding. And Runeward Inferno. The only reason I put 1 point in here, it's a 1 point wonder because we get armor per shock with Runeward. We have a good amount of shock, so enemies should have, bosses should have 10 stacks of shock on them, meaning we get 30% more armor against their attacks. That's pretty good, I think, for a 1 point. And now let's give the final verdict for the build. So here we have it, Runemaster Ignite Glyph of Dominion on patch 0.92. You saw that we killed Julra in 30 seconds. I have a few other 35 second kills for Julra. And I don't even have tier 7 ignites here and there. So you can definitely push that time down to 25 second-ish. So I'm putting it at a solid S- tier for tier 4 Julra kills and for boss kills altogether. The tankiness can be a little bit of a problem. You can see I put it at A-. But in terms of monoliths, corruption 3 to 500 can be done fairly reliably. I did put the mobility at B, however, because I feel like Flame Rush is a little bit clunky. I'm not a big fan of it, waiting there for 1.5 seconds. We do get a lot of damage reduction while we're stuck in that 1.5 second timer with Flame Rush. However, just not being able to move for that long can be the difference between life and death. So because of that, I put it at A- tier for monos. And I think with some small tweaks, you can really upgrade the survivability. I do feel like I didn't get as much out of the survivability side as I could have. So there's definitely room for improvement on my setup. In terms of multiplayer utility, Runemaster has quite a bit of that. So I put it at A. Cost to itemize, I did put A-. You probably want at least 2 LP of some of your semi-core items. And so for final tier, I gave it an A. I think it's a solid A build. That puts it on par with Infinite Lightning Blast, which I think is a respectable place to be. Puts it slightly above Dragon Song Kel'Than hybrid build, which it does make sense. The DPS with Marksman just can't reach this level. And then it's also above Bleed Jav and Lightning Blast Meteor belt build. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. I do think this build is better than those builds and probably on par with Infinite Lightning Blast all around. Obviously, you cannot compare any two builds because there's no real equivalence, but roughly speaking, I think we've got it in the right ballpark. And perhaps there's room for improvement on my setup. Maybe somebody can take it up a notch, maybe to the A+ category. So give it a try. Make it your own, and who knows, maybe somebody takes it to 6,000 corruption one day. And that's the end of the build guide, folks. I'm really sorry it took so long. It's a way longer video than usual. I think I was over explaining a lot of the Runemaster pieces because it's my first Runemaster build guide and it's a brand new class, so I was trying to be a little bit more detailed than usual. Please let me know if I went into too much detail or if it was just right in the comments below. And I can adapt as we go along. And obviously, as everybody gets more and more used to Runemaster, I will probably scale down on the level of detail I go into my explanations as well. But overall, the build is a ton of fun. You can see kind of the playstyle I prefer in monos. There are different ways you can utilize the Glyph of Dominion as well. You can kind of cast it really far away and follow that up with Runic Invocation just to reset the cooldown. And that way inch your way forward through difficult monos. You can really get the sense of it just by seeing this 330 corruption mono clear. And the build is quite fun. Everything gets obliterated as it walks into your glyph. For me, it's a little bit reminiscent of Static Orb Static Ground, where anything that walks into the static ground effect just insta dies. And I loved seeing that. So one more rip for Static Ground. Nevertheless, for the next build guide, I'm still looking into what build I want to do, but I have one really solid idea for a Frostbite build that I don't think anybody has ever run before. So I'm going to give it a try and see if it works, see if the DPS is sufficient. And I'm quite excited for it. I think it's going to be very unique and people are going to get a blast just seeing it. So if you want to check that progress out, come watch it on Twitch. Because it's gonna take me a while to fine tune it and to get it to a point where I'm ready to post a video about it. So yeah, if you want an early sneak peek, I'm gonna get it started on the stream on October 1st. So I hope to see all of you there. And with that, thank you very much, everybody. Special thanks to Niche for giving me the idea for the build, for Wheezy to helping me farm a lot of the items, and just everybody that came by on the stream and helped guide things forward and helped keep things fun. Take it easy and gochiso sama deshita.